The first thing you need to understand is that NASA does not make mistakes. Or at least, that is what everyone believes. The building is a temple of concrete and glass, humming with the sound of computers and the low murmur of people who have dedicated their lives to proving that humans are smarter than gravity. Inside that temple, a young Filipino engineer named Paolo Santos stood in front of a whiteboard covered in numbers that looked like a language only he could speak. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the weight of what he was about to say. Across the table, a NASA scientist with 30 years of experience and a beard the color of storm clouds leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. More like the laugh of a father who has just watched a child try to lift a car. That laugh changed everything. Paolo had come from a small city in the Philippines called San Pablo, where the roads were cracked and the rain smelled like wet earth and hope. His mother sold fish at the market, waking up at 3 in the morning to arrange tilapia on a slab of ice that melted before noon. His father worked construction, building houses for rich people while their own roof leaked every time the typhoons came. Paolo was the first in his family to finish high school, the first to go to college, and the first to step inside a building with air conditioning that never turned off. He had won a scholarship to an engineering school in Manila by building a water pump out of bamboo and bicycle parts. That pump saved a village from flooding during a storm that killed 200 people. He never forgot the sound of the water finally stopping, the way the mothers hugged each other and cried. That sound became the engine inside his chest. The problem at NASA was simple to describe but impossible to solve. A satellite the size of a small car was about to lose its orbit. The math said it would burn up in the atmosphere in 72 hours, taking with it 10 years of climate data that could not be replaced. The team had tried everything. They had run simulations, adjusted trajectories, even considered sending a shuttle to push it, but the fuel calculations kept failing. Every solution ended with the same red error message on the screen. The lead scientist, a man named Dr. Harrison Klein, had declared that the satellite was lost. He was not a cruel man, but he was certain. Certainty is a dangerous thing in a room full of desperate people. When Paolo raised his hand and walked to the whiteboard, Dr. Klein felt the need to protect the team from false hope. Paolo's idea was not complicated, but it was strange. Instead of using a single large thruster burn to push the satellite higher, he suggested using 17 tiny burns spread over 48 hours. Each burn would be so small that the satellite would barely feel it, but together they would create a ripple effect, like tapping a glass with a spoon until the water starts to move on its own. He had learned this from watching his father carry cement bags up a ladder. One bag was heavy, but if you rested after every 10 steps, you could carry 100 bags without breaking your back. Dr. Klein listened for 30 seconds and then shook his head. The math, he said, did not work that way. Tiny burns would lose energy to heat. They would be inefficient. Paolo tried to explain again, pointing to a formula he had derived from fluid dynamics, a principle usually used to study blood flow in arteries. Dr. Klein stood up and walked out of the room. That night, Paolo did not sleep. He sat in a small cubicle that smelled like coffee and despair, surrounded by printouts of the satellite's telemetry data. The numbers swam in front of his eyes, but he kept seeing his mother's hands, cracked and stained from fish scales, counting coins to pay for his entrance exam. He kept seeing his father's back, curved like a question mark, climbing that ladder one more time. Failure was not an option because failure meant going back to San Pablo with nothing. He worked through the night, recalculating every variable, checking every assumption. At 3 in the morning, a janitor named Mr. Chen found him crying. Not loud crying, just tears falling onto the keyboard. Mr. Chen did not speak much English, but he brought Paolo a cup of instant noodles and sat with him in silence. That kindness gave Paolo the strength to keep going. Percent probability. The only catch was that no one had ever tried anything like it before. If he was wrong, the satellite would not just burn up. It would break apart earlier, spreading debris across a critical communications orbit, potentially destroying other satellites worth billions of dollars. The risk was enormous. When he presented his findings to the morning meeting, Dr. Klein did not laugh this time. He listened with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Then he asked one question. Why should I trust a junior engineer over 30 years of established physics? Paolo answered without hesitation. Because established physics never lived in a house with a leaking roof. Established physics never watched a village almost drown. I have spent my whole life learning how to do more with less, and that is exactly what this satellite needs. The room was silent for a long time. Then a young Asian American woman named Dr. Elena Park, who had been quietly supporting Paolo from the beginning, spoke up. She was a propulsion specialist with a quiet voice and a fierce loyalty to good ideas. She said that Paolo's math was solid. She had checked it herself at 4 in the morning. Another engineer, a man from India named Raj, nodded and added that the heat loss problem could be solved by staggering the burns in a specific pattern. One by one, people began to speak. They were not agreeing with Paolo because they liked him. They were agreeing because the numbers did not lie. Dr. Klein looked around the table, and for the first time, his certainty cracked. He asked for a vote. The vote was 11-2 in favor of trying Paolo's plan. Dr. Klein did not vote. He simply stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and erased his own calculations. Then he handed the marker to Paolo and said, "Do not make me regret this." The next 48 hours were a blur of fear and exhaustion. Paolo did not leave the building. He slept in 40-minute intervals on a couch in the break room, his phone alarm set to the sound of waves crashing. His mother called twice, but he let it go to voicemail. He could not hear her voice without breaking. The team worked in shifts, running simulations, double-checking every command, preparing the satellite for a sequence of maneuvers that had never been attempted. Dr. Klein stayed at his desk the entire time, silently reviewing Paolo's work. At one point, he brought Paolo a sandwich and a bottle of water. He did not say anything, but he did not have to. The sandwich was a peace offering, a quiet admission that the young engineer from the Philippines might know something the old scientist did not. The final burn sequence began at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. The entire team gathered in the main control room, a cathedral of science with screens covering every wall. Paolo sat at a console in the front row, his fingers resting on the keyboard, not typing, just resting. Dr. Klein stood behind him, one hand on the back of Paolo's chair. The satellite was 200 miles above the Earth, moving at 17,000 miles per hour. The first burn lasted only 2 seconds. The telemetry data streamed across the screen. Everyone held their breath. The satellite responded perfectly. The second burn, 3 seconds. Perfect again. The third, fourth, fifth. Each burn was a tiny prayer, a small nudge against the certainty of destruction. By the 10th burn, people started to smile. By the 15th, a woman in the back row started crying. Paolo did not move. He kept his eyes on the numbers, watching for the smallest sign of trouble. The 16th burn came and went without incident. Only one remained. The 17th burn was the largest, lasting 11 seconds. If it worked, the satellite would settle into a stable orbit, safe for another decade. If it failed, the satellite would tumble and break apart. Paolo typed the final command. His finger hovered over the enter key. He thought of his mother's hands. He thought of his father's back. He thought of the janitor's cup of noodles. He pressed the key. The satellite fired its thrusters. For 11 seconds, no one in the room breathed. Then the telemetry updated. The orbit was stable. Perfectly stable. The satellite was saved. The room exploded into cheers so loud that Paolo could not hear his own heartbeat. He felt Dr. Klein's hand squeeze his shoulder, hard, almost painful. The old scientist leaned down and whispered something in Paolo's ear. "You were right. I was wrong. I am sorry." Paolo turned around and saw tears in the old man's eyes. The story made headlines around the world. Paolo Santos became a symbol of something that people desperately wanted to believe, that talent can come from anywhere, that a boy from a fish market can save a NASA satellite. He was invited to speak at conferences. His mother was flown to the United States for the first time, and she cried when she saw the ocean from an airplane window. His father, who had never left the Philippines, watched his son on television and told the neighbors that the boy got his brains from his mother. Paolo was given a permanent position at NASA and a salary that would have seemed like a fairy tale to the boy who used to walk 2 miles to school barefoot. He bought a small house with a garden, something he had always dreamed of. He sent money home to fix the roof and to build a new water system for his village. But this is not a story about success. Not exactly. Because what happened next is the part that most articles leave out. The part about love and loss and the price of being the first. Paolo met a woman named Maria at a Filipino community center in Houston. She was a nurse, kind and stubborn, with a laugh that filled a room like sunlight. They fell in love the way people fall in love when they have both known struggle, slowly, carefully, and then all at once. They were married in a small church with a wooden ceiling, and Paolo's mother flew back to the U.S. to cook lechon for the reception. Maria understood his long hours at work, his obsessive need to prove himself, his fear of being seen as the charity case who got lucky. She told him once, "You are not lucky. You are good. There is a difference." He believed her because she never lied to him, not even about small things. They had a son. They named him Jose after Paolo's father. The boy had his mother's laugh and his father's intensity, a combination that kept everyone on their toes. Paolo worked even harder then, not because he had to, but because he wanted Jose to grow up in a world where his dreams were not limited by the cracks in the road. He became a team leader at NASA, responsible for a new generation of engineers, many of them from countries that the old guard had never bothered to learn about. He made sure that every person who walked into his office felt seen. He never laughed at anyone's idea, no matter how strange it sounded. He remembered the feeling of being laughed at, and he swore that no one would ever feel that way because of him. For 5 years, life was good. Better than good. It was the kind of life that Paolo had not even known how to dream about as a boy. Then Maria got sick. It was fast, the way some things are fast when you least expect them. A cough that would not go away. A shadow on an X-ray. A word that doctors say in a low voice, like they are apologizing for something that is not their fault. Cancer. Stage 4. Paolo did not sleep for 3 months. He took a leave from NASA, something he had never done before, and sat by Maria's hospital bed every single day. He read to her. He held her hand. He told her stories about San Pablo, about the fish market, about the boy who built a water pump out of bamboo. She listened even when she was too tired to open her eyes. She squeezed his hand to let him know she was still there. Jose stayed with his grandmother, who had moved to Houston to help. The boy did not understand why his mother was sleeping so much. Paolo did not know how to explain death to a 4-year-old. He barely understood it himself. Maria died on a Tuesday morning when the rain was falling so hard that Houston looked like San Pablo. Paolo was holding her hand when her grip loosened. The nurse said something about her being at peace, but Paolo did not hear the words. He heard only the rain and the sound of his own heart breaking into pieces that he did not know how to put back together. Jose asked where Mama went. Paolo told him that Mama went to the stars. It was the only answer that made sense. He buried her in a small cemetery under a tree that turned red in the fall. He visited her grave every morning before going back to work, because work was the only thing that stopped him from falling apart. Dr. Klein, now retired, flew to Houston for the funeral. The old man did not say much. He just stood next to Paolo and held his umbrella. "Some debts," he said quietly, "can never be repaid. This is one of them." Paolo returned to NASA 6 weeks later. He looked older. His hair had gray at the temples, and his eyes had a distance that had not been there before. But he did not return empty-handed. He carried a notebook filled with ideas he had scribbled in the hospital while Maria slept. Ideas about efficiency, about doing more with less, about the lessons he had learned from his mother and father and from the woman he loved. He presented those ideas to a new generation of engineers, many of whom had never heard the story of the satellite and the 17 burns. He told them that the best solutions do not come from power. They come from scarcity. They come from people who have learned to survive on almost nothing. He told them about the fish market and the leaking roof and the bamboo water pump. He told them about Maria. Years passed. Jose grew into a bright boy who loved building things out of scrap metal, just like his father had done. Paolo never remarried. He said that one great love was enough for one lifetime. He continued working at NASA, eventually becoming the head of a program that sent climate satellites to monitor the most vulnerable places on Earth. The Philippines was one of them. He made sure of that. Every time a typhoon came, his satellites were watching, giving early warnings that saved thousands of lives. He never forgot the village that almost drowned. He never forgot the sound of the water stopping. He went back to San Pablo every year to visit his parents, who still lived in the same house with the fixed roof. His mother still sold fish sometimes, not because she needed the money, but because she said it kept her honest. The tragedy of Paolo Santos is not that he lost Maria. The tragedy is that he almost did not believe he deserved her. He almost did not believe he deserved any of it. The boy from the fish market carried a weight that no NASA award could lift. He carried the fear that one day someone would discover he was a fraud, that he did not really belong in that temple of concrete and glass. That fear never fully left him, not even when he was old and respected and surrounded by people who loved him. But here is the thing about fear. It can break you, or it can become the engine that keeps you moving. Paolo chose the second path. He turned his fear into fuel. He turned his grief into satellites that watch over people who have no one else to watch over them. At the end of his career, NASA held a ceremony for him. Dr. Klein came, walking with a cane but still sharp-eyed. Dr. Park flew in from California, where she now ran her own space laboratory. Raj came from India, carrying a gift of handmade tea. They told stories about the 17 burns, about the night the satellite was saved, about the young engineer who refused to give up. Paolo stood at the podium and looked out at the faces of the people he had worked with for 40 years. He saw young engineers who reminded him of himself. He saw his son Jose, now a grown man with a family of his own, sitting next to his mother, the fish vendor from San Pablo. He took a deep breath and said only one sentence. The smallest people can move the largest mountains, if they are willing to tap 17 times. He died 5 years later, peacefully, in the garden of the house he had bought for Maria. Jose found him sitting on a bench under a mango tree, his head tilted back, his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. The notebook was open on his lap. The last page had a drawing of a satellite, a fish, a bamboo pump, and a woman's face. Below the drawing, in careful handwriting, were the words, "The boy from San Pablo did not fail. The boy from San Pablo learned to fly." Jose closed the notebook, sat down next to his father, and waited for the sun to set. He understood then what his father had always known. That love is the only orbit that never decays. That the smallest people move the largest mountains. That a Filipino engineer once doubted himself, but the universe never did. This is the end of the story. You have reached the final moment. The satellite is still up there, by the way. It orbits the Earth every 90 minutes, passing over the Philippines twice a day. Every time it passes, it sends a signal to a receiver in Manila. The signal is just a string of numbers, meaningless to most people. But if you know what to look for, if you understand the language of the boy from San Pablo, you can see that the numbers spell a message. A message that says, in the simplest possible terms, I am still here. And so are you. And so is everything we saved together.